So, here's a big question. Is religion just fading away? It feels like it should be a simple yes or no, right? But the real story is this incredible mix of decline, comeback, and just total transformation. In this explainer, we're going to dig into why what you think you know about the state of faith, well, it might be completely wrong.
Okay, right away we've got a major puzzle on our hands. Check this out. On one hand, you look at a place like the United States, and the number of people who say they have no religion, it's just skyrocketed. But then you zoom out, and you see that almost all of the world's population growth is happening in places where almost everyone is religious. So, what gives? Is faith shrinking, or is it booming? The crazy answer is, it's kind of both. Let's try and make sense of this.
For a really long time, the story seemed pretty straightforward. The thinking was, as the world modernizes, religion was just supposed to, quietly pack its bags and leave. And that was the main theory for more than 100 years.
And this idea has a name. It's called the secularization thesis. Basically, a lot of big thinkers, guys like Max Weber, they predicted that as societies developed, religion would get pushed out of things like politics and business. It would just become this private, personal thing. It would lose its sway over public life and eventually just sort of fade out. It really seemed like a one-way trip to a secular world. But then the plot completely twisted.
Yeah, it turns out the reports of religion's death were way off. In the later part of the 20th century, sociologists started to see this really powerful countermovement, something that threw a major wrench in the whole idea that being modern automatically means being secular.
And get this quote is from a guy named Peter Berger. And here's the kicker. He used to be one of the biggest cheerleaders for that whole secularization idea. He literally had to take it all back saying, you know what, the data just doesn't add up. He looked around the world and didn't see faith dying out. He saw it roaring back.
So what do you call this? Well, it's called desecularization. And it's not just that religion was being stubborn and holding on. No, this was about faith actively pushing back. It was reinserting itself into public life, a lot of times as a direct reaction to the very things that were supposed to make it disappear. And you can see the proof all over the place. I mean, think about the Islamic revival that completely reshaped the Middle East starting in the 70s, or the explosion of Orthodox Christianity in Russia right after the Soviet Union collapsed. And what about the insane growth of Pentecostalism all through the global South? Even in the US, you've got the long-lasting influence of evangelical Christianity. This is not some small fringe thing. This is a massive global phenomenon.
Okay, so now we have these two stories that seem to totally contradict each other, a world getting more secular and a world that's as religious as ever. How can both be true at the same time? Well, there's a new model that really helps clear things up. It shows that when religious decline does happen, it's not like a switch gets flipped. It's actually a really slow, predictable process that takes generations. They call it the secular transition model, and it shows that this change almost always happens in a very specific order. First, participation fades. People just stop showing up as much. Then, importance declines. Religion doesn't feel essential to their personal lives. And then finally, belonging weakens. That's when people actually stop identifying with the group. The order here is everything, because it proves that our identity, what we call ourselves, is the very last thing to change. It's the stickiest part. So let's see how this plays out in the real world. You can look at a country that's in that early stage, like Senegal. You'll see that younger folks are attending services less than their parents and grandparents. That's the first domino to fall. But, and this is key, if you ask them, is religion important to you, or are you a Muslim, their belief and their identity are still absolutely rock solid. The change has started, but it's really just on the surface level for now. Now let's jump to a country smack in the middle of this transition, like the United States. Here you can see the generational gaps across the board. Younger Americans aren't just attending services less, they're also less likely to say religion is important and less likely to identify with a faith. All three things are happening at once. The whole transition is unfolding right before our eyes. And finally, you get to the late stage. Take a country like Denmark. Here, attendance and the personal importance of religion are already super low for pretty much everyone, no matter their age. The real difference between generations now is all about that final piece, belonging. Younger people are just way more likely to have dropped the religious label altogether. The process is almost complete. Okay, so now we have a pretty good grip on how this whole transition works. But that leaves the big question, why? What's actually pushing people away from the religions they grew up with? And it turns out it's a mix of really personal stuff and huge cosmic level questions.
So let's start at ground level with the personal reasons. What makes an individual decide, you know what, I'm not going anymore? The reasons, as you can imagine, are as different as the people themselves.
But even with all that variety, we do see some common themes. A lot of times it starts with nagging doubts, questions that never really get answered. It gets a huge push from seeing leaders say one thing and do another. For a lot of people, it's just a desire for more personal freedom, or that feeling of not really fitting in with their religious community anymore. And the big takeaway here is that this isn't some dry statistic. We're talking about millions of individual, deeply personal stories. So what about science? Isn't that supposed to be the ultimate faith killer? Well, some people, like the physicist Paul Davies, would say that's a huge misunderstanding. His whole point is that science doesn't have to be the enemy of religion. In fact, as we uncover more about the universe, it can actually lead to this feeling of awe and wonder. It can make you feel like you're seeing a grand design, not just random chaos. I mean, just think about where life came from. Is it all just some massive cosmic fluke? A 1 in a trillion chemical accident in an otherwise dead universe? Or is life somehow a fundamental feature of the cosmos? Some scientists are starting to think life is actually written into the laws of the universe. And if that's true, then our existence isn't some random accident. It's a natural result of how the universe works. And this is a perfect example of how science doesn't just kill old religious ideas, it opens up brand new, profound questions about meaning and purpose. And of course, we have to talk about the biggest game changer of all, technology. The internet has totally rewritten the rules. It's amazing in some ways, right? It connects people from all over the world into new kinds of communities. It gives you instant access to religious texts and teachings. But there's a dark side. It also leads to the commercialization of faith and allows misinformation to spread like wildfire, which can really damage people's trust in the old school institutions. So, when you pull all these threads together, what does that tell us about the future of faith? Well, it's pretty clear it's not a story about faith disappearing. Not at all. It's a story about it going through a massive and still unfolding transformation. So here are the big takeaways. First, the geographical heartland of faith is on the move, shifting big time to the global south. Second, faith itself is changing. It's becoming more digital, more personal, less about the big institution you belong to. Third, it's having to reckon with science, and that's changing how it sees the world. And maybe most importantly, the new dividing line isn't really between different religions anymore. It's becoming a divide between the very religious of all traditions and the growing number of people who have no tradition at all. And all of this leaves us with one last, really big question to think about. As the old institutions start to fade and all these new ways of believing and connecting start popping up, that basic human need to find meaning, that's not going anywhere. So the question that's left for all of us, whether we're religious or not, is pretty simple. In this new world, where are we going to find it?